Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary Miller. And with the student loan pause set to end later this summer, you may be wondering if you should treat your student loan debt in the same way that you treat your other debt, like credit cards or car loans. Well, today I have Robert Farrington, a senior contributor here at Forbes, to tell us 6 reasons why you should treat your student loan debt differently. Thank you so much for joining me, Robert.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yes, Robert. So you have 6 reasons why someone should treat their student loan debt differently from, say, credit card debt. Starting with reason 1, credit card debt should likely be your first priority. Why is that?
Honestly, credit cards carry high interest rates, significantly higher than student loan debt. And that debt is going to continue to balloon if you don't pay it or just pay the minimum payment. So when you're looking at all your debts, and you mentioned a few of them in the intro, student loans, credit cards, car loans, those credit cards to me are one of the most toxic debt objects that you have. And the faster that you can get rid of those, the smarter it will be and the better off financially you will be as a result.
But with credit card debt, it's one of those things where it just kind of keeps coming back at you. Whereas your student loans, you can really eliminate those and be done. So I guess I'm asking, why should I prioritize credit cards? Like, other than the interest rates that'll always be there, why should I prioritize it?
Yeah, well, when it comes to your student loans, there's so many options for repayment. Your interest rate is typically fixed. You have things like income-driven repayment, and student loans even come with loan forgiveness programs, which are one of my favorite things to talk about. With that being said, you don't really get any of those benefits when it comes to credit cards. The interest rates are variable, and they have been rising upwards of 20% these days with the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. You don't get any loan forgiveness programs. There's not really a way to defer your credit card debt. And so, yes, it does keep coming at you every single month if you're not making progress on eliminating it.
Makes sense. All right, so let's get into 2. Federal student loans have multiple repayment plan options. You kind of hinted at that. So what about like the income-driven the option? I know a lot of people who use that one.
Yeah, so you nailed it. There are a lot of ways to repay your student loans, especially your federal student loans. And income-driven repayment are the most popular plans. These are repayment plans that will set your monthly payment anywhere from 10 to 20% of your discretionary income. And President Biden is even proposing a new repayment plan that starting next year could lower that to 5% of your discretionary income. So the bottom line is that your student loan payments can be extremely affordable. And if you're not making a lot of money, that 5% to 20% could be $0 per month. So you're technically paying your student loans, but you're not actually having to make a monetary payment if you're not making a lot of money. So when you're looking at all your debt, again, student loans don't have to cost you as much each month as other forms of debt.
So would you consider that almost short-term thinking? While yes, I'm able to keep up with my loans every month, in the long run, am I messing myself up by doing the income-driven repayment option?
You know, that is the biggest fallacy that I see about these plans, because people get very stigmatized by the fact that my debt balance isn't going down or my debt balance could be rising. But the fact is, you have 2 concerns when it comes to your student loans. One is making that monthly payment every month. So when you have to lay everything out, your student loans could be the lowest payment. So put those to the side, make the payment you have to make, but you can defer paying them off aggressively until later. But part 2 is that all income-driven repayment plans include student loan forgiveness. And if you want to go for other student loan forgiveness programs like public service loan forgiveness, which is very popular, you also have to be on an income-driven repayment plan. So the bottom line is that income-driven repayment plans won't hurt you. They will only help you. They'll help you lower your monthly payment. And let's just say, your finances don't work out. At the end of 20, 25 years, which, let's be honest, is a very long time, but at that point in time, your loan balance is forgiven. So there's really no risk in using income-driven repayment plans for your student loans. It's really a question of what's the best path financially for you. And for a lot of Americans, lowering your monthly payment today, potentially qualifying for loan forgiveness, those are better options. and then tackling these other debts that we're talking about for this show.
So would you suggest even the high earners, should they use this income-driven payment?
There really is an inflection point of where it makes sense. And so a rule of thumb, and this is just very broad, but if your salary is less than your student loan balance, an income-driven repayment plan is probably the right move for you. However, if your salary is more than your student loan balance and you don't qualify for programs like public service loan forgiveness, you might want to look at aggressively paying down your student loan debt. But it should also be the last debt you pay after things like credit cards or car loans.
Okay. All right. So moving on to your third reason, you have deferment and forbearance. So I know that kind of buys you some time. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, first off, let's talk about the big deferment that we're in right now. So if you have federal student loans, your payments are currently paused right now, and they'll likely be paused through at least September of 2023. So there's no reason to make payments on your federal student loans if you don't have to. And you could be using this time right now to pay off things like credit card debt, car loans, or get yourself ahead financially in other ways, maybe build up that emergency fund. But, after the payments restart, or maybe we're talking next year, federal student loans come with a lot of options for hardship and hardship deferment, unemployment deferment. If you're having medical issues, things like that, they can all help you avoid your payments. So first off, you might be better off going back to the income-driven repayment plans that we just spoke about if it's a long-term thing. But if it's a short-term thing like, unemployment, something like that, you can get up to 36 months of not having to pay your student loans. Furthermore, if you have subsidized student loans, guess what? The government pays your interest during qualified periods of deferment. So it's like win-win. Your loan balance isn't even growing if you have subsidized student loans and you defer it. When you look at other forms of debt, like credit cards, car loans, you just don't have those options, right? So again, when we're prioritizing different things to repay, let's pay off the ones that aren't as generous with benefits, that don't help you in hard times. Let's get rid of those, and then we'll leave those student loans for last.
Okay. And number 4, you have other debt forgiveness plans.
Yep. So we've touched on a lot of loan forgiveness, right? So we talked about public service loan forgiveness, which, is one of the best programs out there, because after 10 years in public service, you can get your total student loan balance forgiven. And that's amazing. But there are other repayment plans out there, or forgiveness plans out there as well. You could have teacher loan forgiveness. You could have Perkins loan forgiveness. Most states offer some type of niche student loan repayment plan. For example, if you work in the STEM field in Maine, or if you buy a house in Maryland, these states offer loan forgiveness programs just for that type of thing. It's crazy, but it's a beneficial program.
Wait. Now I'm curious. So if I buy a house in Maryland, all of my student loans are forgiven, some of them, how would that work?
Yeah, so Maryland has this really cool thing called the Smart Buyer Program, where you can get a loan. It's basically a forgivable loan that's added onto your, when you buy a house, and they will forgive it over the course of 5 years as long as it totally eliminates your debt. So you do have to have some rules. You have to buy a house in Maryland. It has to be less than 10% of the purchase price is your loan balance. So if you're buying a $300 or $300,000 house, you're only going to get $30,000 in forgiveness, and that has to eliminate the full amount of your loans. But yes, this is a thing, and it's a really cool program that Maryland offers.
So why do more people not know about these programs? Are people gatekeeping the information? What do you think it is?
Well, they're very niche, right? You have to buy a house in Maryland. It's not a large subset of people. And I know we've talked about it on Forbes. I've talked about it on my site. They're out there, but you got to Google it. There are programs in almost all the states. A lot of them are career specific, but there are some more generous ones, like I'm talking about in Maryland and Maine. I believe Kansas has something similar. They're out there. You just have to spend the time finding them.
All right. So moving right along to number 5. Federal student loan interest can be tax deductible. Can you speak on that for a little?
Absolutely. So we've been in the student loan pause, so no one's really been accruing any interest. However, in normal years, any student loan interest up to $2,500 is tax deductible on your tax returns, which is very similar to mortgage interest deduction, right? So as you're prioritizing your debts, things like credit card debt, car loan debt, those interest payments, they're not going to help you save on your taxes, whereas your student loans and your mortgage will save you on your taxes. So, it's not something, don't go into student loan debt to save on the mortgage or student loan interest deduction, but, you do get this little benefit of having that when you do tax time.
All these benefits, they cannot outweigh the cons of having student loan debt. I feel like you're making it sound like such a good thing, Robert, but what's the catch? There has to be
the catch is that it is a loan and you are going to repay your loan. So when we think about these other forms of debt, for example, when you buy a car, the collateral of that car loan is the car, right? And you don't borrow more than the value of the car. You want to buy a $20,000 car, you could probably only get maybe an $18,000 car loan, and you have to pay that difference. Same thing with a house, right? You have to put a down payment down on a house. And even if you don't have to put a down payment down, you can only borrow up to the value of the house. The hard part with student loans is the collateral is your future earnings. And this is where people get themselves in trouble, is they don't think about this when you're 17 or 18 years old, and you don't think about, how am I going to repay these loans? And so if you borrow too much, even with all of these programs, it will be hard to repay these loans. And in a worst case scenario, you're relying on an income-driven repayment plan for 20 to 25 years before you're going to see that burden disappear from you. So that means you graduate at 24. I mean, you're in your 40s or pushing 50 before you're seeing any forgiveness. And that's hard, right? Mm-hmm. So there is definitely cons to borrowing for student loans. But just like any other investment, if you borrow smart and you're taking on minimum student loan debt that you possibly can, it can be a very good springboard to higher earning careers. And the data does show that, right? The data, you've probably heard these stats that you can earn $1 million more by being a college graduate than if you only graduate high school. Mm. And that's true. But we're also talking about $1 million over 40 years of work. Right. So, it's a big amount of money, but, that really only adds up to maybe $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 more a year. And if you're paying $2,000 a month in student loan payments because you borrowed a ton of money for student loans, the value of that's just not there, right?
Right. So let's say someone has, $200,000, $300,000 in student loan debt, and they're using the income-driven repayment option. They're using the tax deductible. They're finding their state-based programs. They're doing all of this. What do you think in 10 years their loans would actually be?
Well, a lot of the people that are in the $100,000 plus range probably do qualify for public service or at least some type of assistance. So we're usually talking about doctors and lawyers are the most common people to incur large amounts of student loan debt. We're also talking about people with graduate degrees. So graduate school is like the number one thing that sets people well over the six-figure mark. And a lot of these degrees end up in teaching, education, college professors, research. So there are options there for public service loan forgiveness. So it's not just the income-driven repayment plan, but that public service loan forgiveness piece as well. Mm. And so I strongly encourage people to look into that, especially when you think about being a doctor. A lot of people don't realize that you're in residency for 4 to 6 years, which you're working at like a nonprofit hospital. So by the time you're officially a doctor, when you're done with your training, you might have already worked for 6 years. So you only need 4 more years of nonprofit work to get loan forgiveness. Or if you're going to be an educator at college, right? You're going to get that graduate school degree. You might be working in a fellowship or other research program that you could be eliminating your undergraduate debt from with public service loan forgiveness. And then when you graduate with your PhD, you're probably going to go work at a college or university or a research institute or some other type of nonprofit, and you can get public service loan forgiveness as well. So there are a lot of paths to loan forgiveness, and people just need to kind of understand their options and do their research. Mm-hmm. But again, if you're not going to have those loan forgiveness paths, it's really a struggle to deal with $200,000 in student loan debt. And that's going to be a hard burden to get out of.
So how would you propose someone like me who has a voice to the media? How can I get this information out there? Other than these videos, how can I get that information out there?
It's really helping our young adults today, the 17-year-olds, the 18-year-olds, and their parents. We don't put enough pressure on parents and families about these conversations because, let's be honest, a lot of the college decisions, where people go, are a family decision. The kids kind of have some ideas of where they want to go, but parents kind of push them in the right direction or push them in a direction of what's going to happen. And parents need to have these conversations with their kids of what's expected, how are you going to pay? And if there's an alternative choice, maybe it's going to community college for 2 years, which, by the way, is free in over half the states, and then transferring to your state school and graduating with maybe $15,000 in student loan debt. That's a great financial choice for college. And families should be very supportive of that for their young adults in their families and not, pressure them into a private school just because the name is there. Because I think we all know, too, by the time you're in your, late 20s, 30s, and 40s, nobody cares where you went to school. By the time you're at your second job, no one asks where you went to school. They only care about what you did at your last job. So the value of this piece of paper that you're getting, really does start to fall off pretty quickly after you graduate as well.
It falls off, but I'll play devil's advocate. I say my Columbia degree got me in some doors. Like it'll open the door. And sometimes you need that initial door opening to kind of propel you at the start of your career.
100%. I agree with you. But then I always say the other side of that sword is if you don't take advantage of those doors and you're in your 30s and people are like, you went to Columbia and what happened? You kind of go both ways, and it really doesn't necessarily work out. So there is a double-edged sword with it, but it does open doors. It does show you can do the work, and you have to leverage your network and your tools too, though. And I don't know if we've necessarily taught all of our young adults how to leverage networks and career networks and use the alumni association and different things that could help you with those doors. You got the tools, you have to use them though. And that's part 2.
That is. All right. Our final one, number 6, anything could happen with federal student loan debt. What do you mean by that?
It can. And now this is the long shot, right? But number 1 is that the Supreme Court could say, hey, Biden's student loan forgiveness is legal, and we're going to forgive $10,000 to $20,000 in student loans. If that happens, you're going to regret that you paid him off. Let's be honest. Part 2 is it could be the student loan pause could be extended again. Again, this is a very long shot. It might not happen. It probably won't happen. But we've heard the word final at least a couple times at this point in time. So there could be another extension or a pause or something like that. So, the bottom line is that, there are going to be options for your federal student loans. There are options that exist today. There are options that could come in the future. And you're not going to see those options with other forms of debt. You're not going to see them from private lenders, from credit card debts, from your car loan company. They're not extending you these types of deals. So as you're looking at all the different types of debt to repay, I would definitely prioritize credit cards, payday loans, short-term loans, personal loans, car loans, well before you start tackling these student loans. They should be very low priority. Always make your minimum payments, but don't get aggressive with them unless you've tackled all these other things.
All right. Well, you guys, you've heard it from Robert, not me. Student loans are low priority. Thank you so much for joining me, Robert.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. This has been fun.
Yes.